Well, thanks everyone for coming, and thank you especially to Gareth for agreeing to have someone who doesn't really know about trains talk with him about trains for some reason. But I think maybe I thought, as perhaps as part of an introduction, it'd be good to talk about why we thought this might be a slightly crazy but maybe a good idea, which is that on the back of the book, if anyone's got it to hand, it's categorised, and it's categorised as political theory, I believe. And in the same way that I have an interest in trains and want to know more about it, sort of the sense that I got from you is that this was an intervention in political thought without interacting directly with standard discourses of political thought. And I think that's fascinating. And so therefore, I thought it would be interesting to try and draw out a bit of that, because I know that you know that in a lot of ways, it will attract and has attracted attention from people who are interested and passionate about the role that the railways will play. But also there's a kind of a maybe even a more fundamental dimension, which is that ways of thinking about this term which appears in the title, the future. And it's kind of right for a lot of reasons that it was published with Repeater. I feel like it's almost doesn't need mentioning the role of the kind of structuring discourses of Mark Fisher's concept of capitalist realism. And I wanted to start off by talking about the future and talking about the philosophical concept of the future, and basically see if Gareth thinks I'm insane or not. And because when we talk about this idea of fixing the future, there's a kind of literal sense in which that we have this impending sense that nothing is working currently, and if things continue to work in the way that they are, then things will necessarily, or apparently necessarily, get worse. And it feels like we're sort of in this slightly empty time going towards catastrophe, or rather where catastrophe is coming towards us. And I wanted to talk not just about how thinking about the railways might help us prevent something like a catastrophe, but also prevent us from feeling like we are necessarily heading towards one. An idea perhaps that the railways might begin to fix the future insofar as they start making the future exist again. And I wonder whether that sort of accords at all with the way that you were thinking about what the political or implications of this kind of book would be at all.
Yeah, so I mean, both literally in the sense that the book is intended to lay tracks in front of us to give us an idea of what the future looks like, in a sense of, now, how do you actually literally lay those tracks? What's the best way to do that? But also, that's, in a sense, not the key priority of the book, because it's not necessarily a book for rail nerds or engineers, but actually it's a book to kind of explain to a lot of people who don't think the railways are part of the future, why they are a part of the future, and also to give us, any of us, whether we're railway people or not, some, as you say, some actual image of a not necessarily some far off hope that we don't necessarily see a route or a bridge or a set of tracks to, but actually quite literally a set of tracks to something we can tangibly describe as a future and some route to get to it. So yeah, it was kind of fun experiencing the process of going, ooh, what might that look like? How am I going to capture that? And in doing so, the book became much more than just a book about trains, which it also is just a book about trains, let's be honest. But the importance of seeing a future, visualizing a future, is critical, both in terms of the broader philosophical point that I'm sure we'll get into, but also in the nuts and bolts of politically how you make that. There needs to be a strategy to know what the railways actually, how to build them and what they look like. So from a very real political sense, a thing that certainly in the UK we're incapable of doing is actually going, here is a strategy for transport within which rail sits. That's painting a future. That's going, right, as simple as here's a map and this is what the network is going to look like. We can't even do that, let alone go well beyond that and go, well, how will that fit into a future in which we all have an equal bite of the cherry, you know?
Yeah. I mean, the kind of classical way of thinking about this, which I was sort of getting at while we were eating a delicious Malaysian meal just up the road, was... So in Marxism classically and in radicalism in general as well, there's a sense in which the future already exists. Because if you start to think about the future as something which isn't happening yet, what that allows you to start thinking is along quite unhelpful strategic lines about how best to achieve something which you think you've kind of imported down from the heavens. So I've got it open to the page, but I feel like I've probably read it enough times that I know it, which is that Marx writes in this text on the civil wars in France, where he's talking about the kind of basically the failure of the Paris Commune as like one of these various attempts to establish something like a socialist society. And he says the proletariat or the working class have no ideals to realise, but rather to set free the elements of the already existing future society, which are pregnant in our society. Which is to say, it's already all kind of there. Now he's doing it in a kind of more technical sense, but what that means is that the future already exists, and actually it's a political decision in a sense, and a decision regarding political thought. What we decide we think the future already is. And I was wondering whether how railways have historically figured in understandings of the future and why they appear to have disappeared. Because that doesn't sound like that was always the case. I mean, when they could be used for exploitation and colonialism, they were very much a part of what people thought was going to be the necessary progression of how the world must be. They must be used for greater extraction. Do you have anything to say about like how that has disappeared?
Yeah. So what's fun is in writing this book, and very much not being a theorist, is tripping over my shoelaces into kind of making that case very, very literally, in the sense of, or making the case you describe of a future that is not distant and far off and needs to be kind of brought down, but actually, the fundamental point of the book is that we have all the tools we need to build the right future. We have them now, and in fact, people who argue that we don't are in fact delaying us getting to a point of a better future. And it's interesting that that going back to the way that the image of the railways has always been a really interesting one, because when they first arrived, they had no idea what image they needed to imprint. So you had some of them, they were in the early stages, was like, do we make the stations a pub? Do we make the stations nothing? Do we just, is it a stick with the? They had no, and fairly quickly the railways were like, as is, was the dominant view at the time, is, oh no, we make the massive, dominant, big presence, so you had big, solid structures. The structures got bigger and bigger to the point of like, actually, by the time we reached the early 20th century, the early part of the 20th century, these stations were being harnessed by fascism as a tool of visual oppression to people who are actually passing through railway systems. I refer to Milan Centrale in the book as like a station that people often go, oh, it's particularly like architectural traditionalists who go, oh, that station, isn't it wonderful? All that lovely neoclassicism. It's like, yeah, particularly with the bits where they've chiseled the fasces off the wall, and yeah, and like there's a room with a bunch of swastikas still in the tiling, and yeah, the whole underneath was where a bunch of Jews and Roma people were sent off to be exterminated, and and the whole thing was built by Mussolini to basically sneer down on the people passing through it. So like, you know what, maybe that isn't actually a good message for the railways to be sending out. And so you can trace this message, the message that kind of the railways tell, not just in their station architecture, although as the obvious connection point to people, that was the thing that people very much interacted with. But even in their construction, the bridges and things, they like went from being grand brick to every now and then they'd be like, oh no, just a thin spindly bridge that goes through. The relationship between people and the railways changed as... Actually, what's funny is even in the late Victorian period, some of the like views of modernity were quite quickly dispensing with the railways. We were seeing whether it was trams being seen as the future, and certainly in urban mobility, whether it was like the horseless carriage, very rapidly seen as, oh, but that's an individual's transport, and so that's terrific. And, individualism did not start with the car. Absolutely not. But we can see how ideas of individualism started permeating, and quite quickly when the ideal of human development was seen kind of where power was held as being, oh, us as individuals, yeah, it's great if we as individuals thrive. It doesn't matter about the person next to you on that side or the person next to you on that side or the person you just ran over. No, it's great if you're doing well. That shift, the railways very much did not fit into that picture. And so whilst we see some bucking of that trend, either a municipal or even a state level occasionally, actually it's not a coincidence that some of that the USSR made railways its thing in a big way, and that continues to have an effect on how successful the railways are in the Russian Federation, despite what Putin and his mob maniacs have been doing to their country. There's a reason why why Russia and the ex-Soviet states have still got very effective railway systems, is because they were seen as part of a collective future. But we fell out, in certainly in the UK, we kind of fairly quickly didn't see railways as the future, before even the ideas of modernity with car escalating, and of course then the car arrived. And it absolutely bollocksed us, right? Because it was seen as, this is great. So we can kind of have collective mobility by bulldozing 50 metres of motorway through the centre of Glasgow. But everyone will have their, and Corbusier and others who are absolutely tied into this idea of collectivism but with the car, which doesn't feel like collectivism when you look back on it and look at the mess that we have in Glasgow, look at the mess that we have in West London, look at the mess we have with any area that's had urban motorways going through, or, good God, go to North America, go to Toronto, go to Cincinnati, a recent podcast I did, and I just spent the whole time looking at central Cincinnati going, this was a beautiful city. Now it's just like Spaghetti Junction gore, and it's horrifying. And so that image, the idea of the view of the railways as being like, oh, are they the future? That faded, and I don't know if it's... So constant message through here is, why is that faded? Why do we not have an image of the railways as the future? And I suppose I explore that, and we may explore that further, but it very much tied into where power sat. So the story of the railways is very much tied, the story of the image of the railways, if not their actual material history, is tied very much into the relationship of power with, and it was seen as the way for us to burn the most stuff, both literally and metaphorically, was, if everyone has an individualized thing, if we atomize everything, then we're going to consume more, and that's good for line go up, that's good for the economy. And railways did not fit into that because they fundamentally are very efficient. They don't burn loads of stuff, both metaphorically and physically. They actually make really good use of resources, which means it's very difficult to sell stuff with them.
Well, this is the point. I mean, I was reading one part of your book, which and I had this thought, which I wanted to find the quote again, but I couldn't this afternoon. But it seems to me quite obvious why the railways have remained, in most places, broadly speaking, inoperable from a private standpoint. It's precisely because they don't exploit people to the same degree. The reason why climate change discourse has had to take on this idea, capitalist climate change discourse, that is to say, has had to take on this idea of electric cars as something which can plausibly be used, is because there's still people who you can underpay to mine the resources. But when there is actually, because trains are basically quite a capital intensive process, that is to say, running a train, although it takes quite a lot of people, for the amount of people that you're moving from one place to another, it doesn't use quite so many resources. Now, if you are like me, a kind of hardline chapter and verse reading Capital, the kind of person, that makes quite a lot of sense as to why they haven't taken off, because the way that you make money under capitalism is you find labourers who you can exploit for whom you can exploit their time. And actually, despite the fact that, of course, in the history of the railways, there have nonetheless been kind of massive amounts of work done, in many places by immigrant labour and so on. It's not true anymore, and it does pose this legitimate problem for political thought, which is, how on earth are you meant to do anything which might convince people? Because if you think one of the reasons that people are really individualists is because they drive cars, right? Pretty much
there is science to prove this.
The most conservative, when someone asks how they identify, the most right-wing thing that they could say that will indicate anything about their political beliefs is motorist, right? Doesn't matter. People who say that they're motorists first are more conservative than conservatives first, right? Now, if and yes, anyway, after that it's farmers. But
coming from farming stock, yeah.
And so if we think that if people got the trains more, and the last line of this book says, get the train, it's quite difficult to envision how we could possibly get to the place where there are actually going to be any fucking trains to get on without already having established all the things which we think would be promoted by having more trains. So we are kind of stuck in this loop. And my question for you is, you are someone who's actually been able to talk to Conservative MPs and convince them that railways are a good idea, which I kind of gobsmacks me. I mean, do you lie? And you can't say that. But
no, it's interesting, isn't it? So yeah, there's a bit in the book where I refer to, I don't mention him, but it's Hugh Merriman. So some of you might know, the former rail minister. The former rail minister, I forget what the sequence was. No, he was the last one, wasn't he? Hugh, so he's a guy that kind of like, you find the commonality, right? Like you find the point of agreement. And the point of agreement with someone like Hugh Merriman is, with him in particular, not all Tories for sure, with him was actually, he thought rail was quite a good idea. And he thought that the way that they spread, he thought the way they make line go up was good. So you share the, like, okay, here is how you improve the economy by having that conversation. So in a way, it's you explain to them how their aims will be achieved by us doing this, and it's things like, so this is where you get to, you go for you just explain the basics, which is we cannot, it is, and I talk about the AM/FM dichotomy, and electric cars absolutely fall into this. Potholes are a big deal. Annoyingly, they get the literal prime ministers mention the word potholes. Potholes shouldn't be a thing prime ministers talk about. They shouldn't be a thing any MP talks about, let alone ministers of state and the prime minister. And yet they are important. They're like the bins in the UK, right? They're like a big thing that everyone gets very excited about. The thing with potholes is that they actually tell us a bigger story. And that bigger story is there are too many cars on the road. Roads are actually reaching the end of their capability as a technology. They cannot take any more weight a year. The point at which you'd have to spend more time surfacing the road than actually driving cars over it is kind of being reached. People don't talk about this. They go, oh no, but we can infinitely, it's just the ground. It's like Minecraft, it's obsidian, it's solid. You just drive over it infinitely. No, you can't. We've reached the end of that technology working, which means if line go up means people and things moving around, well, roads can't achieve any more of that. And so the way that I've had those conversations, it might not be the reason I think trains are the best thing since sliced bread, but actually it's, if you want line to go up, which I know is, I'm not too worried about line go up in the long term, because climate change is going to make us have to recalculate what we build our entire society around, whether we like it or not. So they can do line go up. If it means they put some railways on the ground, great. We've got some. The good thing about railways is that they are physical. They're there. That you can't get rid of. Well, okay, you can get rid of them once they're there. It's quite tricky to get rid of them once they're there, particularly if you build them these days. So in a way, it's talking about we talk about futures, the future of status quo, the future of individualization, the future of car cannot exist. It just can't exist. It's not that I don't want it to exist, which obviously is true. It can't exist. Those roads, the potholes, are indicative of the end of that technology in its ability to keep mobility, actually, keep us, people and things, moving about. That technology has reached the end of the road.
Yeah, and well, I mean, and it's interesting, but if I might come back, if we're thinking, if we're thinking seriously about the fact that the future already exists, that future, although it isn't what it says it is, already does exist. It exists in the minds of. I genuinely do think that some of these kind of tech bros, which I want to come on to later, do really seriously think that they can create the flying car world, and so to an extent, in the same way that we could say that, well, our future already exists, right? Well, we can't be silly about that. We can't say that, well, our future is the one that exists. Their ones are these kind of utopian dreams, blah, blah, blah. And you talk about something called technological utopianism or technologism, which I kind of want to ask you about, because there's something in your book which is similar to the standard critique of utopianism in general, which is that what these are dreams to placate the fact that you actually need something else. So, for example, what you're sold is the possibility that one day you might get to, drive the cool flying car from Back to the Future or whatever. I haven't seen that film, but or at least haven't for a while. But insert dream of technologism here, and what that does is that makes you no longer necessarily think about what actually might have to be done instead. But you're a massive utopian, right? I mean, like, not in and I mean that in the most positive sense, because I'm the utopia girl sometimes. And it's very clear to me that you have a vision of how things will be if we work hard enough. It's just that you think you're right, and I think you're right too. But is there a comparative dream of rail anymore? Or do we have to be boring? Because, I have to say, Elon Musk's world sounds cool to a lot of people, and people are able to point at it and go, doesn't that sound nice? Now, they don't have to think about it, but I don't really want to think about anything ever again.
Yeah. Well, I think so. And I use this phrase in the book, which is that so tech utopianism is comes from an ideology that really, or the current framing of it. There's always been sort of wild and wacky views of the future, but the current iteration of tech utopianism comes from the fact that a certain generation grew up in the counterculture, the Californian counterculture of the 1960s and early 70s, and that counterculture was quite anti any power, and at the time the power was very much held with the state, right? The US state was enormous at that point, having continuing to come through the Cold War and off the back of the Second World War, and having no intention of winding down the military industrial complex. The state was enormous and powerful. Counterculture decided it was against that. At the same time, you had the rise of libertarian ideologies that matched beautifully. So you end up with the Steve Jobs, the Bill Gateses of the world, and their ideology is that tech, the unstoppable rise of tech solutions, can save us all. If you just get out of the way of tech, reduce regulation, let it march on, there's a natural, unerring tendency for tech to solve all our problems, which is obviously bonkers. It just isn't true. You just look at the mess that we've got ourselves in. You look at the mess that engineers have got us in building all the roads and cars and factories and railways that we use to exploit and subjugate. So I stick with that. There's this phrase which I use to describe what tech utopianism actually is, and it's really useful, which is that it's small ideas made to look big. The point of these, they are small ideas. And how do you make them look small? Well, it's kind of a bit... It's what I talk a lot about evidence in the book, and the fact that evidence is not the end of the story. Actually, it's only one ingredient in helping to paint the picture of the future. But evidence is a really powerful tool, and in this case, all you need to do is explain to people just describe in detail what the future that these tech utopianists are trying to paint. Is go, well, what does that actually look like? This is how many people your wonderful solution will only ever be able to move. Therefore, it's crap. And you kind of lay out, like, well, no, these are the laws of physics. This is what your solution actually materially will move, whether it's freight, whether it's people. This is just, or, often the case, it's like, you're describing cars. That's just cars, Elon Musk. It's just cars, Bebop Gresta. I know we're going to get into the tech bros, these guys soon. But like, so for me, it's like, this is a situation where actually you can use evidence, and one of the things, I talk a lot about the fact that you need to bring along all the other, it's not just engineers who are going to make this case, you've got to bring along all the journalists, the tech journalists, and kind of get a load of pet tech journalists and explain to them why this stuff is nonsense. It's a situation where actually explaining the physical reality that we're in now and how their stuff is totally incompatible with it leaves the space then for us to get on with the stuff that we know works, which is these things, these railway things that I keep going on about. So in a way, it's one of those situations where I move away from the kind of the big arm wavy philosophical stuff and go to, this stuff doesn't work and here's why. And actually, it's grim, it's not sexy, but neither is what they're actually selling us.
I mean, that's yes, but that's interesting because the fact that you describe it as small ideas made to look big, I was kind of attracted to this idea, and actually I think the first line, or in the first paragraph of the book, in the preface, just begins like this, which is that we can no longer tinker around the edges of our society to keep it viable. Humanity needs to embrace massive change on a scale we've not truly conceived of. And you sent me a PDF, and I checked that the word scale appears over 60 times. And the fact that it kept talking about scale had me thinking about something rather strange, and you will have to bear with me. There's a book by Francois Haller, who's a botanist, called, it's something like Litany of the Plant. And in that, he argues that one barrier to the way to thinking about a better society is the fact that we are unable to think about things at scale. which is to say we find it very difficult to imagine what it would be like to not be a human. So, for example, one kind of thought experiment he offers is imagine that you are an oak tree, and imagine how you would think about human beings at this point. And so, I mean, that's just, you can take that or leave it. But philosophy and political thought in general has a remarkable degree of difficulty thinking about scale in two senses. One, it used to be the case that political thought was about the nation state. You would think about how best to organise, France, right? You can't do that anymore for two reasons. One, you've got to think about colonialism, and two, you've got to think about globalisation, right? There is no such thing as a nation subject anymore. It doesn't exist. So we need to think, so philosophy needs to learn, I think, from engineering about how to think about scale. And also, it's very difficult to think about scale temporally. It's very difficult to think about things 150 years from now. Most political theory that is done in universities is all about designing the perfect eternal society which exists outside of time entirely. But the moment that you do that, you're no longer thinking about what might happen or what someone might think in 150 years' time. And I'm just interested in how do engineers think about scale? Because I think actually for a while people like to talk about engineering new futures and all this stuff, but none of them seem to actually listen to any engineers.
Scale is really important, and scale is something, both physically and temporally, like spatially and temporally, really important, because unlike most other policy domains, I mean, there's a bit of give and take with this, with skills are a thing that takes a long time to brew up, and that crosses lots of domains. Doctors don't appear instantly, stuff like that. But there are very few domains, policy domains that will last for multiple centuries. Like railways are still here. They are very much, there are some railways out there that are easily 2 centuries old. There are plenty of bits of railway infrastructure that are older than that. They last a really long time. And so they give us an opportunity to go, well, if nothing else, they ground us in an ability to think about temporal scale. But also, like, as engineers, okay, well, I mean, I can answer the question literally. Engineers think about scale. We have a 120-year design life on new railways we build, right? In the totality. Some elements of it's 40 years, but in terms of the major civil engineering structures, like the big viaducts on HS2, 120-year design life. Who the fuck knows what 120 years society is going to look like in 120 years? Well, thankfully, I know what that bridge will be doing in 120 years, because I can tell you what the performance of the concrete will be over that period. I can tell you what the reinforcing structure will look like. I can tell you with pretty decent knowledge how that structure will behave, indeed how the ground underneath it will behave, save for H.G. Wells level thermonuclear events, how the ground underneath that bridge will behave for the next 120 years. Now you might go, but actually from that basis you can start to go, well actually then if that's lasting for 120 years, then that means that the station could be there for 120 years. And that means that township around the station, that means that the way that people move from there to there, that 100, okay. And it's, okay, so in which case, what will healthcare provision, what will our population be? And it starts allowing you to think in a way that you go, the thing that we constantly do is build, is we do not build for the future, we build, we tinker. This is why I use tinker around the edges at the start, because everything to do with like business case modelling for transport investment, right the way through to the way that politicians talk about the future is just like ever so slight adjustments to the society we have now. I'm not saying we have to destroy everything and start again. We don't need to. In fact, I explicitly say in the book, do not do that. It would be extremely wasteful. But we have to talk about a vision that's bigger, and thinking in that design timeline gives us a chance to kind of start tackling some of those big questions and things like, well, build the society you want to see, build formability you want to see. You don't go, well, the way we do railway projects is, this project will give us 7% growth over the next 5 years, marvellous. Well, that's not very useful. How about this will be the population that we expect in 2100. This is how we want them to move around. Therefore, this is the infrastructure we will need to achieve that. Right, we better get on with building it then. That's the way that you build the future, and that all comes down to scale. Another thing I wanted to say on scale, if I may.
Of course.
is that we cannot. I talk about big, grand stuff in part 3 of the book, which I humorously put as chapter 3.1 because you have to name every chapter. But part 3 is really its own self-contained single thing, and it's the vision of the future, right? Now, I talk in big, grand terms, but I also hope that I don't lose the local, because the thing about railways is that they are also unbelievably local. They have a presence. You have a local station. They have a presence. You have the local freight depot that connects into that can and should tie into the wider municipality. So the connection between thinking big and thinking small is really, really important, because we cannot lose small, because a lot of the problems we have in terms of our political discourse at the moment is that, and we've just seen a massive election get lost in the US for this, and we saw we've just seen a budget that will, if it continues in that vein, will lose the Labour Party the next general election as well, which is, the big picture is, oh, we're making line go up. So that's surely good. Meanwhile, most people in the country's living conditions are getting worse, because that's how our current economic model works. If we continue to go, if we lose that connection between the local and the global, that's not me doing Green Party pitching, although that is kind of their
Sounds
shtick.
quite a lot like Maoism.
Yeah, well, yeah, quite. But if we lose the connection between the local and the global, then none of this works and everything breaks to bits. So it's really important, and that's true for railways. You talked about a tree. Yeah. It's so important that people get fixated on their back garden and what a railway is doing in their back garden, and rightly so. It's good and it's important that they do that. And it's important that when we're building railways, when we're building the future, we think of the trees, we think of the tree in a metaphorical and a real sense, because, and the stupid bat structure discourse that we've had over the last, like, this HS2 bat structure that's cost under £1 million and everyone's made a huge fuss about. And I was on Radio 5 Live at like 11:30 PM, and I was speaking to some shock jock, and I was going, so you want to kill the bats? And he was going, well, that's, I'm just a radio host. I was like, no, what you're saying is you're fine with killing the bats. It's not like a trivial point. That's kind of what you're saying. And if that's what you think, then fine. But the reason we have regulation is that we've decided collectively as a society we don't want to kill the bats. Therefore, the bat structure makes sense. We've lost touch of the local. Like, it's really important that we do not. Local also includes our biosphere. We live in a biosphere. We're part of that biosphere. The moment we ignore the relationship between us and our biosphere is the moment that, well, we've already done that, and we've seen what mess we've caused our planet. It's a tiny rock. We are absolutely integrally tied to that rock by the biosphere. And when I say biosphere, I mean all the living stuff that isn't us. Bugs, particularly, but also all the big animals and fauna and flora and all the rest of it. Lose track of the connection between us and that, and we're screwed. So local, global, scale, time, space. It's all in here somehow. I don't know how I did it, but I cover it all in here. And I do so in a way that hopefully doesn't sound too bonkers. Like, it is like, no, here is a practical way. We'll pick this up, I'm sure. But like, the point of this book is that it's yes, it's about how the railways fit into the future and how that's, I love railways, ... But it is also using railways as kind of a hopefully useful lens through which to think about how we build a future, think about what the future looks like, which is why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because that side of it, yes, the railways are a great bit of it. I love railways, and so I'm not going to trivialise that point. It's really important. And what they give us is really important. But also I wrote this book as a chance for me to explore, well, how do railways... The point you made about railways, about us telling the story about how the railways fit in, and how we convince people and how we make it stick, is something I don't think I've done justice to in the book, actually. I tried to, but it's really hard going, okay, this is great, but we've built the wonderful railways, how do we stop them from getting ripped up again in 20 years, or more likely, how do we stop, like, literally 5 years down the line, the Prime Minister from cancelling all those plans that we had? That's really difficult, and that ties back into, well, you localise the benefits of the railway so that people feel a strong connection. The main reason HS2 got cancelled, the main reason it was able to be cancelled, not that it was cancelled, but the reason it was able to be cancelled is because we had not bothered to localise its benefits. We had not bothered to explain why the railway is beneficial to individuals and why it's a better alternative to the current individual lifestyle we have based around cars. Sorry.
No, but this is kind of exactly the problem, and I think that the thing that's really difficult about thinking about this, I promise that I'm going to stop making kind of annoying philosophy points, and we're going to get on some dessert about Elon Musk later. But so one of the kind of constitutive problems, and probably the problem that has bugged me for as long as I've been thinking about anything, has been this kind of recurrent idea, which is that every time you imagine something beyond whatever it is that we currently have, that is so thoroughly shot through with the ways that our society already is. And one thing that I wanted to pick up on, when you spoke about, you mentioned it today, just now, an idea of efficiency. And I thought it was a really interesting kind of case study for this point. The classic idea, for those who aren't obsessed with Adorno, is that you just can't get away from this idea that you have to be thinking about something that is better than this, right? Once you accept, and if you want to criticize the world, you have to have something to say about what else would be out there. But every time you say what else would be out there, it is you speaking. And so there is kind of no way out, at least not that way. Now, you use the word efficiency, and you use it kind of twice in a kind of beautifully and happily contradictory way, because there's one is the kind of the way that people talk about efficiency in terms of basically market structures. So, for example, when we look at what are the incentives for the current railway leadership in the UK, their first and foremost objective is efficiency. Not efficiency in terms of the use of existing limited resources to maximise the impact of rail, but efficiency as a euphemism for the contraction of the railway system to meet arbitrary financial targets set by the Treasury. And one of the difficult things, I think, for making the case for railways is making them sound like they're going to solve anything at all. Because every time you do that, you have to convince someone that it's efficient. I don't really want to hear about efficiency. Because that doesn't sound like it's going to solve anything. I don't really want to know about how many people it will move, because that has nothing to do with politics, or at least it doesn't seem to immediately. And every time, and I think it's so interesting because as a philosopher you spend a lot of time up in the air about this structural problem. But you are clearly already sort of negotiating it in personal conversations with ministers, because you have to convince them that their concept of efficiency isn't the concept of efficiency that they should be using. But you still have to talk about efficiency.
Yep.
And I was wondering, is there any way that we could start thinking about, I mean, you talk about modal shift as, a better incentive and a better diagram. Is that, how much of that do you think is genuinely the thing that would be good about rail, or is that something is that just a selling point to people who are not on our side and who basically don't want the world that we want, but nonetheless have to be part of the construction of the world that we want?
Yeah, modal shift is selected because it's the best way to describe. It essentially assumes we've agreed that we need a future that essentially assumes we've agreed a broadly common view of what the future is going to be across the political divide-ish. Like, certainly from, with the handshake between leftists and liberals, broadly agreed that we need a future in which we kind of mitigate climate change. Now, modal shift therefore assumes we want to maintain and indeed improve and increase levels of mobility, so that, people and stuff moving around. I think it's a good idea that we move around more, because I think we become better humans when we move around more. I think it's really important that we meet, see, greet our fellow humans, other places across the planet. So mobility is really, really important to me. Also, you cannot have social mobility without actual mobility. I know it's a literal line from the book, but we cannot broaden the level at which we spread our wealth, our prosperity, without people being able to move around and respond to that. It's not saying that everyone should have to move around to chase prosperity. It's more that they should be able to, if they want to. So it's painting that picture, and modal shift it's also more of a factual reality. Like, you can't avoid the fact that this many people travel by train and this many people drive by car or are driven in cars. And so it's a much more useful direct objective than something that's much more arbitrary, because it is measurable. It's an unavoidable truth that it's very difficult to hide. It's very difficult to hide from that. Whereas efficiency, certainly in the way that Treasury abolished the Treasury, by the way, certainly in the way that efficiency is used by Westminster and by any government is generally make spend less money, please, right? And I talk a lot about waste and about efficiency and about capacity in the book and about our weird attitudes and relationships to those concepts, particularly waste as well. Like, waste is seen as a bad word when actually waste is just another word for kind of having capacity. And like we've just come out we're not through it yet, but we've moved from pandemic to endemic. We've just seen what capacity looks like if you don't have it for a health system, right? Bad. 200,000 plus excess deaths. Not good. We want that. Waste is good. The people who go, the NHS, you'd save the NHS if you just got rid of the waste, are morons. They're idiots. Yeah. They have no idea how a big system works. Efficiency at the sacrificing capacity is not actually efficiency in the sense. What they're actually creating is what I describe as bad waste, which is where you think efficiency comes from having private organisations run it which employ a load of extra unnecessary people. That's bad waste. I've gone off on track here. But the key thing I want to message is that objective is one that allows a common understanding. And so I think it's important. It's a better incentive. Efficiency is interesting because the thing about railways is that if we're talking about we're on a planet, we're on a funny little rock with all its various minerals and such, and that's it. There ain't anything else. Like, okay, we might get a few extra minerals from going and landing a rocket on an asteroid a couple of times, but the reality is, on that rock, that's everything. And we've kind of realised this in a bit of a painful way recently because we're currently in the process of torching the atmosphere on the outside of that rock. Now, if we want to continue to survive, we need to look after that rock and the stuff that's attached to that rock that we use. And so if we're going to keep moving around, if we want to have the mobility we have, we need to pick the solution that moves us around burning and using the smallest number of those materials. So it's kind of an interesting one, isn't it? Because we go back to a material reality of, well, we're stuck on this rock, and if we want to keep moving around, then we need to do so in a way that doesn't burn everything. Yes. And railways are better at that than cars are. That is the truth. And if we want to, there are loads of other social benefits of going for railways than cars, and I talk about plenty of them in here. But the material grim reality is that we just can't continue to move in the way we do currently. Potholes to one side.
It's a question of what you value, right? I mean, so what's determined as waste? I mean, there's a famous quotation where Trotsky says to a bunch of people, off you go to the dustbin of history. But maybe even more interestingly, there's a quote by kind of one of my favourite guys, who's a fellow called Walter Benjamin, where he talks about the refuse of history, those who've got that which has been kind of historically refused. And basically, you can pretty much always work out exactly how a society is functioning by working out what it determines to be waste. I wanted to talk about efficiency again because it's kind of come up and it's becoming slightly the logic of modern fascism, because the way that there's been this kind of interesting discursive connection between the idea that we need to be functioning efficiently in the market and kind of moral or cultural degeneracy. And basically this is now functioning with this belief that Suella Braverman had, that everyone in the civil service who didn't have a real enough job needed to be cut, is precisely the same thought as the fact that I shouldn't get the healthcare that I need because that is deemed as a waste of what the state does. And that is why the most fascist person in the United States government, which is to say Elon Musk, has had this stupid department invented for him, which is the Department of Government Efficiency, which is so lame.
It's so lame. It's just so tragic. If I would love to have the mirror. I would love to have the mirror that you hold up to Musk to show him how tragic he is. He would melt like soup. It would just be. I don't know why soup is melting, but it is melting.
It is melting.
He would melt like soup. It would just be sludge on the floor. It'd be glorious.
Yeah, and so I mean, maybe I'm just trying to kind of segue to talk about tech, but it is really interesting to see how efficiency is functioning in this way in your book. And it's not a contestation about what the most efficient thing would be. It's a contestation about what it means for something to be efficient. And I do kind of think that might be a real battleground for the left, because the idea that we should be attempting to conserve certain resources or invent new resources or use resources in a way that actually affects lots of people, that's not efficiency anymore. Efficiency is how much money is made, pretty simply. And it seems that your book makes kind of an intervention at that level, and that's the cultural politics of it in a way. It's
interesting. And there's an example which is nice to talk about efficiency, which is the obsession with the money spent on the railway. Often comes down to let's put it another way. I often say when I'm delivering lectures or whatever it is that you could write a blank check for the railways tomorrow and we'd probably not be able to deliver much more quickly than we do now. When I say deliver, I mean, build stuff, run stuff more efficiently, because the limiting factor is on how many of us, there might be anyone else who works in the rail industry here. Hello, glorious to have you. Skilled people who actually understand the railway, understand how it works, understand how it all fits together and how you make more of it. Those people are in extremely short supply, just as is the case across many domains. Like skilled people, and I get very angry about STEM in here. So when I say skilled people, I don't just mean engineers. I mean practitioners of ethical thought as well as of physical thought. So I don't just mean or rather, it would be good if engineers did more of the ethical thinking and balance some of their physical thinking with ethical thinking. But skilled people are a real limitation on what we can deliver. And actually, when it comes to efficiency, that is the tightest resource the railways have, and actually it's the tightest resource that we have on lots of problems we have in the country. Planning gets talked about all the time. People go, reform, AI, all this bollocks that will fix planning. No, the thing that will fix planning is funding councils enough again that they can have lots of council officers and highways officers and planning officers so that they can actually look at the things that we're asking them to do, like, can we have how many towns, cities, York is a perfect example, that supposed to have had a local development plan that then allows people to know where houses are going to go, where businesses might then want to go, where people are going to live, and people can make long-term decisions. How many of those cities in the UK just have not still got round to actually doing that local plan? And that's a people resource limitation. And the efficiency was seen as, we just get rid of the people. Because ultimately when you're cutting costs, it means fewer people doing stuff. Yeah. And it means we do less. It means we achieve less. When actually it's not money being burned. If you're employing a bunch of highways officers, planning officers in a council, they're in good jobs, should be. They're being paid well, should be. They're paying taxes, therefore they're not only are they paying taxes back into the system, they're doing a public good by facilitating growth or facilitating the way we expand spatially. That accounts for all the things we talked about, regulation, not killing all the bats, that accounts for all the things we've collectively decided as a society we want out of our spatial development. That's their role, is to go, we as a society decided we don't want to destroy the biosphere, we've decided we want to look after these spaces, we've decided we want to have spaces that are accessible by, for disabled people, that are inclusive, that are accessible by active travel modes. We've decided as a society collectively of all those things, but we've got rid of all the people that allow the developments to look like that. So efficiency, if it's about getting rid of all these people, if it's the flipping Department of Government Efficiency, Musk is talking about getting rid of more of those people. The discussions from the likes of Create Streets and sorry if anyone is here from Create Streets, but certainly the discussions from like Britain Remade and some of these think tanks that look ostensibly like centrist or even sometimes it could be interpreted as centre-left if you don't pay enough attention. They're like, no, we want to build things in Britain. And then you look under the covers like, no, what you want to do is get rid of... You're talking about transport and about the fact that it'd be great if we got rid of regulation, we could build more trams. But actually what you're actually lobbying for is to allow us to do more Grenfells by you building lots of crap housing that doesn't have any regulation, by not having any public transport connections, by not having any cycling, all this stuff. That's actually what these efficiency people want. They want to strip back regulation so that they can basically, they want to build, but they don't want to build in a way that's actually for us. Yes. They want to build something that's for them.
It just got me thinking about plans like that and about their connection to the way that tech makes money. And people talk about how things like people don't realize how much things like narrative about what people expect to happen and utopianism is directly involved in the way that our economy now functions. Because the way that you make money, if you're an investor now, is you don't create anything, you convince someone that you're going to. Yeah. And so there's a temporality problem, right? Because what you do is you convince someone that a certain future is going to obtain. What you then do is convince loads of people to give you venture capital funding in order to do that. Hence the line, right? So the line never existed as anything other than something to secure venture capital funding. And so when I talk about how a future is already operative in the present, I'm talking about the fact that those people would not be making any money. No one would think that that was worthy of investment if they thought that whole idea was bullshit. Yeah. Now, and it has to look not quite enough like bullshit for them to secure that venture capital funding. And this is how every single one of those, what did you call them? Gadget barns function is because, and basically, what we need to do is make as far as possible convince people that those things are never going to happen, and that is how you make their line stop going up, right? That means that they are not going to secure investment, because if they looked at something like the line and saw it for what it was, they'd say, well, that's bonkers.
It's so funny to me that the Saudis, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, called their biggest, most ridiculous vanity project the line. Given we're also talking about line go up in relation to our current market framework. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's critical, and this is why I tackle quite a lot of this bullshit with. I've interrupted your question. We'll come. No, but like, this is why I tackle a lot of this stuff in a not sneering, but more of a like painting their ideas as ridiculous tone. That's why I always tackle it as being, no, that's ridiculous. Yeah. Not the thing about pigs is they love rolling around in shit. Like and like, so you don't want to get down and. I did a funny little sketch on Twitter once, which is like I drew like tech, need for better transport on one side, like in as many words, and like the technology in another little circle, and like a little circular diagram that people always spend all the time concentrating on, like, oh, we need something different, and technology, and oh, well, will the technology work? And I say these are both completely missing the fucking point, which is the idea is will not achieve anything. It doesn't work. And it's not because of the technology, it's because of fundamentals about how you move stuff along a given corridor. And so yeah, these people who have funny names, they're not that people, okay, right, this is, if we're going to get into making fun of people's names, it's not because I'm making fun of people's names, it's because of the type of guy who puts this stuff forwards. The tech bros, the Bebop Grestas, the Dirk Allborns, the Elon Musks, the Bebop Gresta. So I met Bebop Gresta. He's the only mental tech bro that I actually met, and like, oh, his scarf was enormous. And again, I don't want to diss people with big scarves, but his scarf was absolutely enormous. And it's a nice scarf. His scarf was like, what are those like Instagram pictures of the people doing the catwalk and they just have like ridiculously oversized jacket? It was like that. I know, well, this is it. Like, he was a ridiculous little man. And we're gonna talk about gender in a minute, because I really want to dig into like tech bros and gender as a kind of a funny way to think about tech bros. But basically, like, the way we have to puncture these bubbles is by laughing at them. But the way we laugh at them cannot just be ha ha. It has to be ha ha, no, but also this doesn't work. Yeah. And also here's a better, no, this just does, like, you've just and this is why actually I hate people replying to to gadget band stuff with the monorail gif and the monorail songs. It's like, no, that. What is funny is to say, just send them a picture of a train. Just go to St Pancras, to go downstairs to St Pancras, take a video of one of those Thameslink trains coming through and absorbing 1,200 people, and just send that video to use that video to reply to this bullshit. Because as soon as people see that, the advantage of doing this stuff in the US is that certainly in the circles that they're trying to pitch to get venture capitalist funding, none of those people have seen a train. They don't know what a train looks like. They don't know that they absorb hundreds and hundreds of people in one go. Which is why when they get excited about a thing that looks like a business jet that you've chopped all the wings off, like, they get super excited about that thing and it carries 20 people. And they're like, whoa! It's like, it's just a business jet in a tube. It's not exciting. In fact, it's rubbish. But that's the approach you have to take, is like the ridiculing, but with the support of, and here is the thing that actually works. And they go to such efforts to like undermine. Anyway, right? I'm going to cut myself short because I'm conscious of time. Let's talk about gender.
Excellent. Well, my favourite. You refer to, in the last line, you refer to tech bro sadists. They're not sadists, they're masochists, Gareth. Which is, no, but it is different. No, I know what you were trying to say, but it is interesting that it's, and I think there is a kind of, masochist masculinity, which is slightly preventing the possibility of railways, I think, which is so. And I think this involves efficiency, because I don't think that this efficiency is directed outwards, right? The efficiency is directed absolutely inwards, and it is completely identified with. It is the same reason that they wake up at 3:30 in the morning in order to like eat the worst thing that you've ever seen in your life. And it's why, they're injecting the blood of their sons.
All real stuff they're doing. Yeah.
In order to kind of secure eternal life, is because there's not to say that there's like no sense in which you should like get up in the morning to do something, but the identification of that as something which sucks, right? To talk about like the grind and the fact that you will therefore deserve something because of the amount of suffering that you've gone through, broadly speaking, is the logic of fascism always. Because the logic of fascism is pretty frequently this belief that no one has ever had it harder than me. Everyone else is just sort of lounging around in their own shit while I've been doing everything for all of history, which is why people will point to, if you look at like architecture that was built under colonialism and it's still around, and then people point at it and go, wow, didn't we used to build stuff? Yep. The idea is that because we're not trying hard enough, which is why Thatcherism became fascism, right? So it's why Thatcherism and Reaganism became fascism, even though they weren't completely at the start, or rather it was always the latent fascism in it, because it was always basically the idea that people hadn't been working hard enough and they had to go to the job centre and have those values instilled in them. And what I'm interested in is how that has become completely inseparable from most concepts of masculinity. And it is interesting to me that there appears to be, because cars are kind of like boy shit, but to an extent also so are trains. And I'm
I feel seen.
and what I'm interested. I mean, and people talk about how people love to talk about how all struggles are interconnected, and they don't usually say anything more than that. It's usually just a nice Instagram story for them. But in this case, I do think there is a real sense in which we are encountering a new and even lamer form of fascism, which is preventing the possibility of us thinking about the future, which is kind of nerd masochism.
There's like what's funny about it is the impotence of it. And so the answer I just gave was about impotence, right? About the impotence of their ideas, small ideas made to look big. It's so funny how I just talked about Elon Musk in that mirror. The thing that's ridiculous about him is his impotence. Is how he's so obviously pathetic. Yeah. And ultimately we look back on fascism and see it as ultimately pretty pathetic. It's like an enormous collective insecurity. But how we How we tackle that is it by, well, liberal politicians will say, well, you tackle it by giving them everything they want, which I'm not convinced is a good idea.
No, me neither.
No. Do you tackle it by pretending it's not there? Well, no, I don't think that either. I think ridiculing it is not a bad way to go about it, but not in a like, haha, kind of like, oh, you're such a hypocrite kind of ridicule, but like the ridicule has to be founded in the better picture. And again, I come back to this. The reason I made such a point of painting the better picture is because you cannot ridicule it without going, but this is what the good thing actually looks like. So I come back to that. So I've taken us back to train and away from away from like the concepts of masculinity that these tech bros embody. But it is funny that there's an impotence. We were kind of jokingly, and I might be about to get cancelled for this. We sort of said the sort of feminine brackets derogatory about about these guys, and I kind of take from that what you will. But it's kind of like they want to be seen as super masculine, right? But ultimately, it's impotent in a way that there is no impotence about femininity. That's not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying. But it's like, do you know what I mean? Like
in their vision of femininity,
yeah.
Well, actually, there is a lot of impotence about femininity. It's just that's not what femininity is, right? That's the social construction of what femininity means, right? Which is when people who a certain sort of feminism will sort of say, well, we're just as good as men, or something like that, or we're just the same as man, and we'll imitate masculinity, and that's kind of basically how you get TERFism. But I think it's the pathos of it, the patheticness of it is the way that it now functions. Because they always have to construct themselves as not being enough, right? It means that they have this kind of future in which they are constantly whipping themselves in order to achieve whipping themselves.
Well, it's the grind set. It's like the phrase, the word that they've made. I'm conscious of time, and I don't want to get to the questions. Maybe my watch has stopped then, or maybe it's an hour. Actually, it's probably an hour out, isn't it? The idea of the grind set, that they're obsessed with this. Oh, I do all this personal hard. Again, it's fascism. It is fascism. It's not like a weird philosophical esoteric thing to call it fascism. No. These are fascist people. Yeah. Their view of the world is appalling. The world that they want is appalling. The reason why they're coming up with these transport systems that move very few people is because, as they see it, most of us don't deserve to move around. I'm not just saying that because it's a funny or a grand thing to say. That is literally the vision of the world that they want to create. You look at the few really white South Africans who seem to be moving into like Neom. Who knows? You look at those folks moving into some of these sort of Neom or the bits of Neom that actually exist, which is basically like just a series of hotel and golf courses that have popped up. Yes. These sort of weird canteens that they go and eat at. They're like these huge spaces that are just empty, and they're designed to be for not the pig people. They're not for us. They're for like this weird tech elite that don't like seeing any other people, which is why they design their systems to be like you get like loop, not hyperloop, but loop, right? The sort of the technology thing that Musk, the transport thing that Musk ostensibly did build, which is just a buried tunnel of traffic with taxis in it, right? But that started out as being buses with like 6 people in it, and then it shrunk down to just Teslas. And it's like this is a perpetual the reinvention of transport. It always ends up just being for a guy, right? And never for lots of us. And that is the picture that's why I keep coming back to this: small ideas made to look big. Like they're very small, very, very small men, and these are very small ideas, and that's why we should laugh at them, but then build something better as well.
The difficulty is that laughing at them just reaffirms their masochism, right?
Yeah.
And like that's the kind of structural problem that we have, because the more that like they feel like they're the outsiders, because Elon Musk and Donald Trump have managed to convince everyone that loads of people who are the richest people in the world are the people who are in fact excluded. And me personally, I am personally in control of the media and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Trans
people have so much power. You have to be very
it's really true. We do. We look cooler, and that's enough for them. Look, I do kind of think, we should wrap up and maybe talk to some people. Hey guys. But I wanted maybe to return maybe just right kind of back to where we were at the start, which is that it seems to me that effectively the level at which something like the railways can operate politically is something like, in the best possible sense, a kind of thought experiment which is meant to not just reflect the way that you already think, but actually transform the way that you've approached something before, to talk about the world in which efficiency does mean something else. Maybe doesn't mean that we will necessarily implement that. It doesn't mean that necessarily we will get it right every time, but what it might do is provide something like the drive towards whatever it is that would allow us to live on this planet for more than 25 years more. And I kind of wanted to thank you for writing a book which made sense to me, someone who finds it almost quite difficult to read anything that isn't philosophy. And I was able to read it and locate in it basically everything that I care about. And so I think it really is such a wonderful book. And thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Billy. It's a pleasure to chat to you about it. And I'm so pleased when we did the kind of the publication day night event where we all stood in the big hall, Mark Brunel's big hall, and we got chatting, and I was really pleased to. I know don't think too much about that sentence. I was really pleased that in the conversation we had about this, and then you picked it up and I read it. I was really pleased that you saw that, and I've been pleased that other people have picked up that it is a book about railways. It's a nerdy railway book. There's loads of fun nerdy railway stuff in it. Yeah. But I want it to be, not just because I want more people to buy it, but because if people grip into the non-nerdy railway stuff, they might accidentally make railways happen. And that's probably quite a good thing for all the reasons that I put in the book. So there are reasons why I've written this as a political book as much as it is a nerdy railway book. And the fact that that seems to have worked makes me incredibly happy. Billy, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for the questions. I suppose...
Thank you, Gareth. I think we're going to clap now.
Thanks. Sorry, yeah.